Okay, Matt, and other students. Let me just say something. I forgot to mention one detail. The classes normally start at a quarter past and not on the hour. So between the hour and the quarter past, the students basically come in and so on. So the class is supposed to start at 9:15 your time and 2:15 in our side, and it takes 2 hours. Just as a reference.
Okay.
But meanwhile, we can actually start.
So it's going till 4:15 on your side?
No, until 4. So it's 1 hour and 45 minutes actually.
Okay.
Okay, are you getting the slides?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Okay, so as you remember, last time we discussed a little bit about the mechanics of the course. I don't know if any of you have any questions regarding that. Okay, no questions. And we also discussed a little bit, just a very, very short overview about XML. It was really short because most of you already have worked in XML, so that shouldn't be a big surprise. And actually, the first project was published on the website. Please do start working right away in the project. Today I was teaching the Open Lab, and there was just a few students that actually came to class and asked some questions. But it was really very, very few students. So please start working right away, because if you don't, you'll not have time to actually complete the project with quality. Today, what we are going to talk about is XML validation. So how do I make sure that an XML document is valid, and XML transformation. So if I have an XML document, how do I transform it into something else? Okay. Actually, this is quite important in enterprise application systems, because in many cases, XML documents serve as contracts or data passing between interfaces. And in general, when you have an interface and you have a document passing by, you want to make sure that the document conforms to some kind of schema of your data. You want to make sure that the document is valid, in a sense. Another thing that we'll see, especially not on this class but on the next class, is that in general, one of the core things that you have to do in enterprise systems is actually to transform documents. So imagine that you receive an invoice with a certain format. In general, you have to transform it to another format so that it can be used in your system. So let's start a little bit by talking about validation of documents. You know, last time we talked about well-formed documents in XML, and if you remember, a well-formed document in XML has to comply with certain rules, like it actually has to form a tree from the root to the leaves. Every time you open a tag, the tag must be closed, and so on and so forth. But that doesn't give you all, right? Because imagine that I have a system and I want to be sure that a certain element, a certain tag is always present. Or imagine that you have a tag that represents, for instance, a CD or a book, and you want to make sure that it has an ID which serves as a primary key, so an identification. How can you do that kind of things? Or imagine that you have a document and you want to make sure that a certain element only appears one time. For instance, the identification number. It may not make sense to have more than one identification number. So, to actually support this kind of functionality, there were two standards, let's say, that were developed. One is called DTD, Document Type Definition, and the other one is called XML Schema, or XSD. DTDs were very, very popular in the beginning of the XML movement, let's say. And basically it specified what kind of attributes and what kind of elements documents could have and the order in which they could appear. It was a very small specification. It's very easy to read and to use, but it has some major, let's say, shortcomings. One of the shortcomings is that it doesn't support data types. So imagine that I want to define a data type which is a person, and the person has certain elements like a name, a last name, a social security number, an identification, and so on. And imagine that you want to have a client which is a derived type from person, okay? That's the kind of things that you cannot do in DTDs. And actually the kind of things that you can enforce in a DTD is it's quite limited. The other thing that people complained was that XML was thought to actually describe data and documents and so on. And actually DTDs were not specified in XML, which made it a little bit odd. Imagine you have a format that was thought to specify documents, but then you don't really use it to specify them. It seems a little bit strange. So what happened over time was that people basically create a different standard, something called XML Schema, or XSD, with a similar kind of objective, so describing the metadata that an XML document can have, but actually being much more richer. In particular, supporting data types, supporting advanced validation, and so on. Nowadays, in reality, most of the people, or everyone in fact, uses XML schemas and not really DTDs, but it's still useful to see the kind of things that you can do. So let me show you a very simple example of a DTD specification. So if you look to the bottom, basically you see that you have a normal kind of XML file. So this is the CD catalog. You can see that you have several CDs. The CDs have an ID, and then basically each CD has a title, an artist, and a year. And if you look at the top, what you see is the DTD for this XML file, or for this type of XML files. And what it says is that, I'm going to go very quickly through this. What it says is that the document type is a catalog, which is what we are defining. And the catalog is made of a sequence of CDs. And the star in this case means 0 or more elements, okay? But now we have to define what a CD is. And in this case, a CD is a sequence of title, artist, and the year. And in this case, the question mark means 0 or 1 elements, okay? Which means that actually the year is optional. And if you continue on, you see that CD also has something called an ID. Actually, the ID is this attribute. And you know that it's an attribute because it's no longer an element, it's no longer a tag, but it's an attribute, okay? ATT list. And basically, the data type associated, it's C data. C data means character data. They are just characters. They are not parsed. They are not interpreted. It's just raw characters, okay? And then you have something that says required. This means that actually every CD has to have an ID, okay? And then you define what a title means. In this case, title is preprocessed character data. Actually, the name is not preprocessed, but it's parsed character data, sorry. And what this means is that imagine that you have a tag inside of title. You know that you cannot put, imagine that the title would be Screaming Fields of Sonic Love, but Sonic would be between left the minus sign and the plus sign. You know that you cannot do this in this file. So parsed character data is when you actually parse the data before you put it in a data type. Okay? And title is also parsed character data, and here is also parsed character data. So very simple definition, and what you can do with this definition is basically make sure that the document below is actually valid. So imagine that you put a CD with two titles, because a CD can only have one title because it's title, artist, and year. If you have a small application that validates the document, the application would complain. Okay? So this is the core idea behind DTD definitions and actually validation of XML documents. One of the things that you may notice is that if I do it like this, it seems a little bit silly, because on one hand I have my document, right? And on the other hand I'm stamping the definition on the document itself. So there is no separation between metadata and document. So in general, you shouldn't do it this way. You shouldn't put the metadata and the data together. You should separate them. And the way you do this is basically saying in the beginning of an XML document which is the DTD associated. And you put the DTD in a different file. So again, imagine that you are a company and you are actually accepting orders for catalogs of CDs. What you would publish should be something like this, which is the DTD that you use for validation, and actually the clients would send you something like this. And the clients could actually identify the metadata that they are using in the definition using basically this doc type, catalog, and then the name of the file. Okay, so in general, there is a separation between the two concepts. Okay, I went through this, and you can actually look at this in detail later on, but when you define things in a DTD, all the definitions are recursive. So it's the Beck's normal form. So you define a tag or a rule, and then you define sub-rules and so on, like I was doing. When you specify an element, you can in general say if the element is optional or not. This is then stating a question mark, which means 0 or 1 times. You can say that an element has to appear at least 1 time. That's done with the plus sign. And you can actually say that the document can appear 0 or more times. That's done with the star command. Basically, sequences of things are enclosed in parentheses, and basically you put commas between them. So it's really direct to do. Again, I went through this example already. So catalog in this example is the root element. It has 0 or more CDs. Each CD is a sequence of a title, an artist, and 0 or 1 years. Okay. Then I define title to be parsed character data, artist, and year also. Okay? Questions so far? It's really simple, intuitive. It's not really a problem. Okay. Again, I went through this. You can define elements and so on. It's not really crucial. One important thing, if you need to define empty elements, which means elements which don't contain anything, basically you have to specify them using the keyword empty. In general, this is used to say that there is an important attribute which doesn't have any information. So imagine that you have something which, imagine that you want to have an attribute that represents, let's say, a contact or something like that, but you don't have any information about the contact. In general, you have two different options. Either you don't put anything in the XML file, or you put a tag, but you immediately close it. In general, that's an approach that you use when you have null values. So the information is important, but you may not have the information to put in the file. Okay, as I said, elements can have attributes. For instance, in this case, CD has an attribute called ID. The data type of the ID is character data, which means that it's the characters has the AR, and then basically you can parameterize the attribute. In this case, we are saying that the ID of a CD is always required. Okay. Okay, we went through this also. Another thing, when you define attributes, in this case in CDs, you can parameterize them. What this means is that if you put something between commas with something inside, basically that becomes the default value, which means that if you don't have it there, it will assume that value. If you classify it with required, basically you always have to have that attribute present. For instance, the ID of the CD. If you have implied, basically this means that you don't have to include the element. If you parameterize it with fixed and value, this means that the attribute must be always present and the value is fixed. It's the value that you put there. Okay? This is also useful sometimes. For instance, imagine that you are validating against a certain version and the document defines the version itself. In that case, you may need to have an attribute in which the value of the attribute is fixed and it's the version of the data type being used. Okay, here's a couple of examples. So imagine that you want to have an attribute which has a default value which is character data 0. Basically, you can define it, and actually you can override the default value. If you don't override it, it's actually 0. Okay. Implied means that basically you can omit the value. So in this case, you have a contact which is a fax number, and it's either character data or basically you can put it empty saying that you don't have information. Required means that you always have to have something there. Fixed means that the values are actually fixed. So imagine that you have a company and you say it has to be Microsoft. So if you put sender company equals Microsoft, that's valid. If you put something like W3S schools, it's invalid. Yeah.
Oh, what's the meaning of the default value? Why do you need a default value?
Okay, so a default value is just like in a programming language when you initialize a field to a certain value. Here it's the same thing. So imagine that you have an XML scheme or a DTD which represents something that is being purchased in your company. You can have a default value which is the phone number of your company, but you can override it with the contact person of the person making the purchase. So it's simply to make it easy.
But you use the DTD to verify if the XML is correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do with the default value?
So, okay, the major use of the DTD is actually to validate the XML. But one of the things that we'll see is that DTDs and in particular XML schemas also act as a contract. So actually when you are giving not a DTD but an XML schema to someone, you are actually saying something about your business and the kind of data that you expect to receive. So again, imagine the default value could be used for the other guy to actually fill in the default, but if he wants to override it, he could do it to something that would be also valid. Okay? Press the button, please.
But when is done the validation, the default value is not applied to the...
No, it's not applied. So the DTD is something that is given to someone. It's not applied, or it doesn't import anything to your system. Okay. So I agree with Carlos. It seems a little bit strange to have a default value in there, but that's something that is supportive. Okay.
In the fixed, since this is always the attribute company Microsoft, for example, can we omit that attribute company?
No, you can't. No, in this case you have to have it. Okay. Press the button again. Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. In terms of things that you can put in attributes, as I said, you can have character data, which is data that is not parsed. It's simply characters. You can have an enumeration. You can have something like a unique ID, which means that if you have several tags using an attribute or having an attribute, when you validate, the attributes must be different. You can have things like references to other IDs, lists, and so on and so forth. Okay? Entities, notations, and predefined things. Again, you can look at examples of this in quite a lot of detail in the references provided. Another thing that you can do, again, I'm not going to go into detail into this, is you can actually define strings pre-handed like constants. For instance, imagine that you define something like copyright to mean this string. Basically, whenever you used, I don't know how this is called in English, but this character copyright, it will
Ampersand.
automatically be included. What's the name, Matt?
Ampersand?
Okay, ampersand.
The copyright.
No, he's talking about the ampersand before copyright.
Okay. Another thing that you can do is actually to have entities which are internal or external to the document. So imagine that you write something like this in a DTD. So in this case, basically, you are defining a string that is going to be used in the current file. But actually, if you are importing things that are defined in different files, basically you write system and then the name of the file. Okay? Again, DTDs are really simple to write and to use. The only problem is that they are, in fact, legacy. It's quite nice for in class understand what's involved, but nowadays no one is actually using DTDs. What everybody is doing today is using what's called XML schema. XML schema, it's basically DTDs defined in XML. It's much more powerful than DTDs. The main disadvantage is that they are really not readable and they are not really, let's say, programmer friendly or user friendly. So this is an example of an XML schema. So it's actually the exact example that we were talking about. And as you can see, it's not really that readable compared with the specification that I put before. So let me give you a quick overview of what's involved in defining an XSD file, an XML schema file. So, okay, in this case I'm saying I'm using a namespace, and this namespace is associated to a schema, and that's the string I'm using. And as you remember, a namespace is a way of controlling scope of things, okay? And in this case is the definition of schema. I'm defining an element. Remember, an element is a tag, and the name of the element is catalog. Then I'm saying that a catalog, it's a complex type. A complex type is basically a sequence. A complex type is an element that can have children, and the children can be a sequence. So in this case, the complex type is actually a sequence of elements, so it has several elements. And I'm saying these elements occur at minimum 0 times, and at maximum an infinite number of times, which means, in this case, unbounded. And what I'm putting inside of this sequence is actually CDs. So imagine, a catalog is composed of childs, which are CD elements. But then I have to define what a CD is.
What if you have more than one catalog, not only CDs, but anything else? Like you have catalogs and inside you have CDs, books, and so on. How do you say it in the reference?
So basically you need to create an alternative, okay? So we'll see that in a moment, okay? Okay, so we'll get back to that, but coming back to the example. So in this case, a CD is a sequence. As you can see, it's a complex type. It's a complex type which is a sequence, and it has the title, an artist, and a year, okay? And the year can occur 0 or 1 time. And if you notice, you also have an attribute associated to the CD. In this case, the attribute name is ID. It's a string. If you notice, you actually have something called a type. It's a real data type. And in XSD, you actually have rich data types. And the ID is actually required. Okay? And then you move on and you define what things mean. So in this case, title is a string, artist is a string, and year is a string. Okay? Okay. I'm just going to turn on the air conditioning. Give me 5 seconds, okay? Concentra. Okay, sorry guys. Go ahead.
If in the root element we have title, for example, how does it know that validation? Why does it fail?
So it fails because you are saying that that's odd. I think I have. I think there's actually a mistake here.
Yes.
Because I'm not indicating the root element. Okay? So there's actually a small mistake here because I'm not indicating the root element, which means that catalog and CD are at the same level. Okay? And title and artist. Okay? So there's actually a small bug in the slide. Let me just check something. Okay. Okay, in this case it's properly done, I think. Okay. Okay, there's a small mistake on the slide. I will correct it later on. Okay, how do I normally specify an XSD file, an XML schema file? If I want to do it, again, it's using namespaces and schemas. So what happens is that in this case, what I'm saying is that I'm using an XML schema instance, okay? And basically, I'm creating a namespace for it, okay? XML namespace. And in this case is the name that I want to give it. In general, when you use a schema, you also should point to the location of the schema, okay? So in this case, the schema would be stored in this place, cdstore.com/cdcatalog.xsd, okay? Okay, so imagine that you want to convert, this is another example. Imagine that you want to have something like a book, and the book can have title, has a title and an author, and the book has a category, and the category can only be fiction and non-fiction, and it's required, and then it has a title and an author. So in this case, this book, for instance, would be a valid book because it has a category, it's compulsory, it has a title, and it has an author. So let's see the corresponding schema. So you have the book, which is actually the root element. The root element has a complex type inside, and this complex type is actually a sequence containing title and author. You then have an attribute, which is category. It's required. And actually the category, it's a simple type. And as you can see, you have real data types in XML. In this case, it's an enumeration, and it can be fiction and non-fiction. Okay? Okay. Some important points. When you define an element, it can be a simple type, which means that it only contains text. It doesn't contain any children or attributes. For instance, in this case, title, it's a simple type of type string, or it can be complex. And this is how you differentiate between them. A complex element is one which has not only text, but also children and or attributes, okay? For instance, In this case, book, it's a complex type. Okay? If you want to see the standard data types which are defined, you have things like strings, decimals, integers, booleans, dates, times, and actually you have several types of strings and several types of numbers and so on. It's quite rich in terms of data model. Okay? In fact, one of the problems sometimes is to actually decide what data type to use. Another thing is that you can actually create your data types, starting with basic data types. And that's something that many times you do. So everything that you can do with DTDs, you can do with XML schemas, but you can actually do more things. You can do more powerful validations. For instance, in this case, I'm defining the age of a person, and I'm saying the age has to be a number, an integer. It's not a floating point, it's not a string, it's an integer. And the name of the age of the person has to be between 0 and 100. So you can define, let's say, more rich type of validations. You can actually say that you have, for instance, a string, but the string can only assume certain kinds of values. For instance, if I have a car, I can only have a BMW or an Audi. I cannot have a Mini. Okay? And you can even do things like defining regular expressions for validating elements. So in this case, I'm defining a phone number, and I'm saying that the phone number is an integer, and the pattern that it has to abide to is having digits from 0 to 9, and it has to have exactly 9 digits. So if you have started to do the first project and started to study regular expressions, you will be familiar with this type of syntax. Okay, I'm not going to go through this because, again, you can get a big XML book which states everything, but there's a lot. There's many different kinds of things that you can do in XML to validate things, like enumerate types. You can have a maximum number of digital places, a maximum length, and so on and so forth. Okay? As I was saying, another thing that you can do in XML schema is advanced data modeling. For instance, you can define something that is very, very common to people doing object-oriented programming, which is actually this is funny because the lights are going up and down without any apparent reason. But what? Mm-hmm. Okay. So it supports also advanced data models. So the kind of relationships that you see in object-oriented programming, like inheritance or containment or references, you can do all that in XML. And in fact, some people actually use XML to model object-oriented systems, and there's even a standard for that called XMI. And some people actually model databases using XML, which is a little bit odd, but some people do it. In this case, I'm giving you an example where you have a complex type which is person info, so the information of a person with the first name and the last name. And then I have a derived type. You can see that it's a derived type because the base type is person info, which was defined here. And this derived type basically adds some information about the address, the city, and the country of the person. Key points about XML schemas. It's defined in XML, which is nice in a way because it's a confined language. It has one problem. It's really painful to use because it's not very readable. supports generic data types, has normal people that do object-oriented programming are used to use. It also supports advanced validation. Another thing is that, in general, and this is quite important, if you have data in a database model, in general, you can actually translate that data model to XML, including references, keys, and so on. Another thing is that it has explicit support for namespaces, which means that you can actually do things in modules, which makes it easier to combine it in large systems. Big disadvantages. The learning curve is somewhat steep. So normally you start by using 2 or 3 things and then you evolve and evolve and evolve, because the number of things that you can do, it's actually huge and it's not really readable. And actually, because XML is defined in XML and it's very, very verbose, in production systems it's actually slower to do validation using XML compared to DTDs. Although this in general is not a huge problem. I can also tell you that most of the people writing XML schemas in general use tools to help them. In your first project, if you want, you can use a tool to help you write the XML schema, but you need to understand what's written and how you are writing it. During the defense, one of the things that we'll do is to look at your XML schema and ask you about the way it's modeled. So imagine that you just trust what the tool produces. In general, the tool doesn't know how you are going to handle missing values, new values, and so on. So that's the kind of things that you actually have to restrict by hand and actually be careful about. As I said, in general, XML validation, XML schemas are used to do XML validation. But they also have a very, very important function. Nowadays, in general, XML schemas act like a contract. So imagine that you have to access a certain server, okay, using web services or whatever. In general, for you to be able to talk to that web server, to that web services server, actually you need to understand the language that you are going to send there. So you need to know which are the data types, which are the methods, and so on and so forth. And all that information is defined using an XML schema. So what people will do is basically give you a file saying, this is the language I talk, this is how I represent information. And then you have to prepare information according to that standard. One of the things that you should take into account is that, in general, doing XML validation is really a slow process. Okay, so if you validate every single thing that comes to your system, it's really painful and slow. So what happens in many systems is that you only do validation at the frontiers of the system. So imagine that you are a company and you have several information systems that exchange messages among them using XML. Okay? Imagine that you control that process very tightly. In general, what happens is that when someone sends you a message, you validate it at the entrance of the system, but if it validates okay, basically you don't do validation after that. That's a very common approach, although, as you may imagine, it has some risks. What are the risks? What's the problem of only validating XML at the entrance of the system?
If someone changes in between? If someone changes the document in between, it starts to be rubbish.
So again, if you have a large organization, And if one of the, let's say, departments of your organization decides to use a different kind of schema, what's going to happen is that the documents may become invalid. And in general, this results in some very nice exceptions and core dumps and things like that. But it's done even so in many cases because doing validation is so slow. Another place where you normally do validation is basically when you are putting XML into a database. So in general, on those occasions, you validate the XML against a schema. Okay? The important point to remember besides this is that XML schemas are a contract. They represent an agreement between two parties. Okay? They represent the metadata that has to be exchanged between these two parties. This is so important that there's even an organization called OASIS, which basically standardizes the schemas and the type of information that you use in different businesses. So imagine that you are working on supply chain management. Okay, so you have people producing products and people buying products, and then you have to send those products to warehouses and so on until it hits the shelves of a store. Basically, these guys standardize what XML documents should look like for this kind of business. Okay? Imagine that you are working on security, or imagine that you are working on e-commerce, and so on. If you look in general, for important businesses, OASIS has some kind of specifications to be applied. Okay? It's one of the major players. There are also some other players that we'll talk about later on in the course, but OASIS is a reference one. Okay, before we carry on, so up until now we talked a little bit about XML documents, DTDs, and XML schemas, so how to validate documents. The thing we are going to talk about in the rest of this class is actually how to process XML documents, okay? And this implies basically looking at technologies like XQuery, XPath, and XML transformations. Questions so far? No questions? Do you guys at CMU have any questions? Or are you bored to sleep now?
Why is XSLT USA XSD?
Oh well. Okay, let's move on. Okay, guys. Okay, before we move into those types of... Yeah.
Teacher, I think she was talking about the usa, its uses in Portuguese. It wasn't translated.
Oh, I see. I can correct that. USA means uses in Portuguese.
I mean something different here.
Well, okay. One of the things I'm not going to go through in this class, but that you should take a look at, especially for the first assignment, is XML-based programming. So I just want to say a very, very brief thing. In general, when you are developing software using XML, you are not really generating code with print lines or reading strings directly. That's really not the way to go. There are libraries to do that. There are nowadays 3 main approaches to actually process XML inside of programming languages. The first one is using something called DOM, Document Object Model. And the main approach behind DOM is that in the API, you pass him a certain document, and it creates in memory a tree that represents the whole document. And basically, then you can query which nodes are where and what information are inside of each node and so on. That's the first approach. Can someone tell me what's the problem with this approach? Or do you see a problem with this approach? Eugene?
Memory consumption?
Memory consumption. So imagine that you have a huge document. Imagine that you have a catalog with 10,000 CDs. By the way, that would be a bad idea. But imagine that you have a huge XML document, or you have a server that actually receives XML documents and has to do something with them. Basically, if you represent all the nodes in memory, you are going to consume a huge amount of memory. So in general, you should only use DOM when you have small documents or you don't have many concurrent threads processing those documents, okay? The second approach, it's called SAX, Simple API for XML Processing. Don't be fooled by the name, because simple is not simple. Actually, SAX is much more complicated than DOM, okay? Which seems ridiculous, but it's true. So, in SAX, what happens is that what happens is that you define callbacks in your program which are called every time a certain node is reached. So imagine that you define a callback so that every time an element called book appears, you get a callback, and a function of yours is executed. So you define these callbacks, and when the processor actually executes the XML file, it's going to visit all the nodes in the file. And every time it reaches a node that matches one of these callbacks, it calls the callback. What's the advantage? The advantage is that you only need to keep one node in memory at time, right? Because you are visiting the tree, so you can iterate. What's the disadvantage? Programming with callbacks, it's really not that programmer friendly, okay?
When a callback is called, the node that is represented in memory, it's the node and all the subnodes, or only the node that is...
In general, it's the node. Again, it depends on the implementation. So these are 2 standards for W3C, and actually the only thing that they standardize is the interfaces that must exist, okay? Actually, the implementations can do whatever they want. In general, what the DOM implementations do is to represent everything in memory. What the SAX implementations do is to basically try to represent the minimum information possible. But in fact, that's implementer dependable. I can tell you that nowadays, good APIs that, for instance, support DOM don't actually have all the nodes in memory. What they do is to do on-demand loading of the document, okay? But the programming model is really different. There's a third approach that is being used nowadays extensively in Java and also in .NET for that fact, which is called XML data binding. And what XML data binding is that you define a class or a set of classes that represent the XML document, and you always work in terms of objects of your programming language. So imagine that you have a document with books and catalogs and authors and so on. Basically, you'd have the corresponding classes and there would be a binding between these objects and the document. Behind this, the XML data binding, actually it can use either DOM or SEX. Again, it depends on the implementation. This is something that you will need to look into carefully for the first assignment. In these slides that I'm not going to go into detail, basically you have examples of code that you can actually use and understand to take care of the first project. Okay? Let me just tell you why I asked you to use JDOM instead of just DOM or SEX. This is a very small program. It doesn't really matter what it does. But if you try to use Java's DOM directly, basically you get 2 pages of code. If you write the same code using JDOM, well, you get less than 1 page of code. So in general, JDOM is a lot easier to... Sorry, it didn't fit. This is the code. Actually, JDOM is a lot easier to use than the normal DOM of Java. Okay? But again, this is something that you can look at offline, and you have examples on how to read and write documents. You have examples in SEX also, which uses those nested callbacks. So whenever you have a start element, basically you get a call. Whenever you have an end element, you get a call, and so forth and so on. Okay? Okay, some bibliography. Again, you have this on the first project. Okay, so let's go to the fun stuff now. Okay. Any questions before I proceed? Okay. Okay. So you have XML documents which represent data being sent across systems. You have validation that makes sure that the data conforms to some kind of data representations. But in fact, in many systems, you actually have to transform the data somehow. On the next class, next week, we are going to study a use case, let's say, discuss a use case about enterprise application integration. And one of the things that we'll see is that in many cases, when you have, for instance, systems with different interfaces, for instance, this represents a store which has 3 income channels, like a web interface, a call center, and fax, where people can actually order things. In many occasions, you are generating files with slightly different format, but then when it gets to the core system, the format has to be unified. It has to be uniform for all the systems, which means that in between, you actually have to put something called a message translator. Okay? This is described in the Enterprise Integration Patterns book that you are using. So it's important to have a way to transform XML documents easily between systems. And one way to do that is actually to use something called XML transformations, okay? XSLT. XSLT is typically used to either convert XML documents to another type of XML documents. For instance, imagine that you have an invoice that was specified using some kind of schema, and you need to transform it to still an invoice, but in a different schema. for doing that, many people would use XML transformations. Another thing for which XML transformations is used is actually to generate human-readable or user-readable documents, things like HTML pages or even PDF files. Okay, that's the kind of things that you can do using these technologies. Okay, XPath, it's a query language. It's a little bit, it's the SQL, the SQL of XML. Okay, and what it allows you to do is basically to query certain nodes in an XML document that conform to some kind of predicate. Okay, we'll see this in a little while. For you to get an idea, the whole set of this type of technology is called extensible style sheet language, and includes XML transformations, XPath, which is the query language to actually do the transformations, and something that we are not going to look into in this course called style sheet formatting objects. This is the kind of objects that you use when you generally want to generate device-independent kind of files. So imagine that you want to generate a document that could be rendered either as a PDF or a DVI or something like that. You'd use formatting objects. But again, that's not the focus of this course. The other two technologies you are going to use in this course. Okay, let's start with XPath because it's the most basic thing that you need. XPath basically allows you to ask for certain nodes in a document without actually having to put the document in some kind of hash tables or to process it in strange ways. Basically, you have the document and you can write a query that gives you some nodes. This query is actually based on paths to nodes. So if you actually write an expression like /catalog/cd/title, basically what it does is to select the title node, which is under the root of the document, under catalog, and under CD. It's very, very intuitive. But as any query language, is also very powerful. So imagine that you write something like //cd. What this means is that if I have a huge XML document with CDs anywhere in the document, this will select only the CD nodes, okay? And then you can have an iterator that goes over those CDs, okay? So let's look at some examples. So imagine that we have that small XML file with the catalog, the CDs with the titles, artists, years, and so on. And we write, and we want to process this. So when you actually read this document using, for instance, DOM, what happens is that it creates a tree in memory that represents the document. So you have a root node, and this root node actually points to the catalog node. Catalog is actually the root node, okay? And then the catalog has a number of symbolings, so it has 3 CDs. And the CD has an attribute, which is ID, which has a text, which is 001. It has a title with some content. It has an artist with some content. It has an year with some content. So in XPath, basically, you can query about seven different types of nodes. You can query elements, like CD. You can query attributes, like ID. You can query the text inside of node, like the Screaming Fields of Sonic Love. You can query namespaces. You can query the special processing instructions, like the thing that is normally no, that is compulsorily on the first line of an XML document. You can query comments, and you can actually ask for the document. When you ask for the document, you get the root node, okay? Another important thing that you should consider is that, so think about, I don't know how many of you use Linux or Unix, but when you are in the shell, you always have a current working directory, right? In XPath, there's always a current working node. And whenever you perform a selection, whenever you write a query, the query is against the current working node. So for instance, imagine that you are deep in the tree and you ask, and you do a query which is 2 points. That means the node immediately above you. Imagine that you perform a query which is star. That means all nodes that are below you, okay? So it's really important when you write queries to always think about which is the current node I'm in, okay? Because whenever you write a query and use iterators, you are actually changing the working node. Let's see some examples. So imagine that you are in a certain place and you query cd. If you do this, what's going to happen is that all the cd nodes which are immediately below you are going to be selected. So imagine that this is the current working node. If I do a query which is cd, what are the nodes selected? Those 3 CDs, right? But imagine that I'm on this working node. If I write a query which is cd, what's going to be selected? Nothing. Because the query is cd, right? So you see it's important to have the current working node. Okay. If I write a query like slash, basically I get the root node, the top of the document. If I write //cd, independently of the current working node, basically it's going to select all the CDs in a document, okay? Above and below. If I select dot, basically I get the current node. .not, I get the node above the current one. And if I put an @ sign, basically I get the attribute whose name I'm writing there. Okay? Yeah.
If I want to take all nodes below CD, and they are different, I have to do one query for each one?
No.
Or I can do all?
You can do all. So actually, we are going to see in a moment, but you can actually navigate according to what's called axis, and you can say, I want all the descendants of this node, or I want all the siblings, which should be written somewhere. Falling sibling, and so on. So we'll get to that in a moment, okay? So let me give you an example. It's not really important that you understand everything at this point, but imagine, let me show you what a transformation file looks like. A transformation file is something that you apply to an XML file to get something else. And in this case, what I'm going to do is to apply this transformation file to my original file. So I have my catalog. I'm going to apply the transformation file, and I'm going to generate a nice HTML document, okay? So this is a little bit like a template in HTML, like a cascade styling. Well, kind of like a cascade styling sheet. But what I'm saying here is that I'm generating an HTML document which has a header which says current CDs in the document. I'm creating a table. Now look at this. What I'm saying is, for each one of the nodes given by this XPath expression, which is select all CDs, I want to put this piece of HTML. So when I write this XPath, basically this selects all the CD nodes, and because I have a for each here, this generates an iterator that jumps from CD to CD, independently of the place where it's on the tree. So imagine that you are in a certain CD. Now you can write a different query. So if I'm on a CD, I always know that I have a sibling named title, one named artist, and one named year. So I can write an X query here saying, give me the value of title. Okay? And when I do this, basically, I'm putting this inside a table row, inside of a table data, which means that it appears below name. And then I'm doing, for the current CD, I'm selecting the artist, okay? And I'm selecting the year, okay? So if I do something like this, let me show you, so that you can see I'm not lying. Hopefully I can do this. This is also available on the web page. Let me show you the source. By the way, all browsers nowadays support this by default. Every single browser has an XML transformation engine. So, look at the source of the page. The source of the page only has XML, right? But now I'm saying, I want this XML file to actually use this style sheet using XML transformations, catalog to XML2.xsl. If I open this file, basically, it's the example that I was showing. I'm selecting all CDs and generating a table with the title, artist, and the year. When I do this, basically, I get something like this. Okay? And again, the source of the file doesn't contain any HTML. Okay? So it's a transforming technique. Questions? Yeah.
Is it possible to see the resulting HTML?
Not in this case, because in this case I'm doing it directly inside of the engine. So whenever I ask to see the source, what I get is the XML file. Okay? So you see, it says source, although it's basically showing this. Okay? You can actually do that if you apply XSLT in a different way. So in this case, because I'm demonstrating the system, the XSLT that I'm using is embedded directly in the browser. But actually in production systems, which have nothing to do with web pages and so on, this is actually an application that is run separately. So when you run this, basically you give him the XML, you give them the transformation template, and it generates some kind of result. Okay? The way you do this, okay, I'm going to move over because it's really at the end of the presentation. The way you can do this in terms of code is by doing something like this. So imagine I have an application where this is not the example I wanted to show you. So in this case, basically I wrote a small application where basically you get the XML, you get the transformation file, and basically I'm generating the HTML, okay? And this really outputs an HTML file. The way I'm doing this in terms of code is basically with something like this. I instantiate a sex builder, so something that is able to process HTML. I create a document in memory. I instantiate a transformer, okay? And then I transform a document, okay? At the end, basically, I dumped it to file, okay?
What would happen if the transformation file was not in the server, in the same folder as the XML file? Would the browser render the XML file naturally, or would it
we can try it. So let's see what happens. Again, guys, please do take in consideration that my objective is not for you to be just generating HTML. My objective is that when you have an enterprise system, and you'll see this on the third project, you need to transform XML to XML. And the technology that is normally used is this one. So it's not just generating HTML, it's really producing other XML files. But let's see what happens. So the file I was using was
somebody blocked it.
It was this one, right? So let's move it to a different place and let's see what happens in my browser. It should complain that the file is not present. Okay, it basically, well, it does something strange. It only outputs that. Yeah, it's
Paul, we have a question.
Sorry,
question
Matt?
from the CMU side.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between transformations and validation? Do you typically transform prior to validation or after, or what are the implications of that kind of thing?
So it depends a lot on the system. It really depends on the system. So imagine that you are receiving some information from your external clients, like invoices or something like that, and there is an agreement between you on the format to use. That format is agreed using an XML schema. Now imagine that your business changes and internally you need to enrich the invoice with certain information. For instance, you need to change the XML file to state if the product is available or not before shipping or something like that. In that case, you transform the file on the inside. But it really depends from situation to situation.
Yeah, I could imagine there'd be a lot of difficult things with error propagation and performance and so forth if you had a number of disparate internal systems that that were both getting data and having to transform it into a common internal language and structure.
That's
that error propagation
correct.
and performance.
So what happens is that, especially if you talk about service-oriented architectures, and basically you have autonomous systems on an enterprise service bus, which is something that we'll see later on. Basically, when you have each one of these systems, you validate at the entrance of the system. That's a very, very common approach. But if you have, let's say, a silo, a vertical system, once the data is validated at the entrance of the system, you don't actually validate it again. But again, it really depends on the system that you are deploying. Data enriching is actually one of the things that you use transformation a lot. for which you use transformation a lot, because in general, when you get a document and you need to actually process the information, sometimes you have to generate other documents and you have to put more data inside these documents. That's going to be exactly the example of next class. So transformation is very, very widely applied for that. Okay? Okay.
Could you go back to the slide where you have transformation being applied within HTML, please? The question is, can you apply that same kind of transformations, but within an XML file calling, well, no, it's the one that has the code. Yeah, this one.
This one?
Yeah, exactly.
I tried. It's not that I don't want to answer, you know. Let me see, where was it? It's this one? No.
Yeah, this one.
Okay.
This one works for the example. Instead of being using HTML with calling the XLS file from the inside, can we have an XML document calling another XLS from another XML to generate new XML?
Okay. This is actually a bad example on doing this. And the reason this is a bad example is that in general on an XML file you shouldn't have the pointer to the transformation file. The only reason I'm doing that is that I'm trying to show it in a browser so that it's simple. So in terms of a browser, I don't think that you could do that. So you could not put an XML file with a pointer to another XML file with the transformation file. But I haven't tried it. Again, the point is not generating HTML. The point is actually a technology that allows you to transform XML into something else. Okay?
But you can use XSL to transform XML into another XML or not?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the question that I was making.
Oh, I thought that you were saying an XML file to another XML file.
Yeah, the question was having an XML file with a pointer to another XML file, but to generate a new XML file.
Why would you want to do that?
Because in there, the HTML, it's pretty much works like XML by itself.
So what you mean is to have a transformation file that transforms XML to XML. Is that it? Yes, you can do that. But again, in this case, the reason I'm doing it like this is because I'm using the browser. The browser doesn't do it for you. So in general, you need to have an application server or a command line program that transforms one thing to another. Okay? Okay, so going back to the slides. Okay, some examples of queries. Again, you can download the standard and you can see the example, so I'm not going to look into this in much detail because this is basically learning a syntax. You can select nodes starting from the root. You can get a root element. You can get all the nodes independently on the place in the tree. You can select, for instance, all the nodes artists, which are under CD, which is under the current node. One important thing is that when you do something like this, you are actually selecting all the nodes all the nodes artist, okay? Which seems a little bit odd. The way it normally happens in programming languages and in transformations is that when you select a bunch of nodes, then you need to get an iterator to actually iterate over the nodes, okay? But CD artist actually selects all the children artists from CD. So if you write something like /catalog//artist, what you are doing is saying, I want all artists which are under the root which starts with catalog, okay? So you have an extra constraint which is the beginning of the document. And you can also select things like attributes. The marker for attributes is the @ sign. So if you do //@ID, basically you select all the ID attributes, okay? Another thing that you can use, it's what's called predicates and functions. So actually, I was telling you that when you select nodes, you can select all the nodes or some nodes. So between brackets, you can actually do things like, give me the second CD after catalog, okay? Or given all the CDs that exist, give me the last one. Or give me the first 3 CDs. So this is actually an interesting expression, okay? Because what you are doing is putting a condition, and now what happens is that this condition is evaluated for all the nodes that are visited. So imagine that you are on the first node. It's like the node asks itself, what's my position? 1. Is 1 less than 4? Yes. Then I should appear. If you are at the 7th node, the condition is evaluated for the 7th node. Okay? So it's not just selection, it's application of a predicate that must be satisfied for each node.
Just a first one. The position starts counting from 1, not from 0?
I think it's from 1, actually. But, again, you can look at the specification. I think it's from 1 in this case. No. If I say 3 CDs there, then it should be from 0. Again, that's something that we can check. Okay, so it starts from 1. I can't count anymore. Okay, imagine that I want a CD that has a certain primary key. For instance, the CD which ID is 2. Basically, I could write, give me all CDs which satisfy the predicate. Its ID equals 2, okay? And this one would be selected. Or imagine that a CD actually has a sibling called year, and I want to find out the title. Basically, if I wrote, give me all CDs which year is above 1990. So imagine, this is evaluated for all CDs, and all CDs that pass this test, I will extract the title. Okay? And so on and so forth. Another thing that you can do is actually combine expressions. So I can write something like //title, getting all the titles, or //year, getting the years. Of course, I don't know exactly what I would do with a mix of titles and years, but in general, you can combine expressions with the # sign. Okay, again, XPath it's quite rich. You can apply operators like plus, minus, times, div, mod, and so on and so forth. And you can actually apply functions, things like convert to number. This is actually very, very useful. When you start to implement things with XPath, you will see that if you don't convert some of the things to number, it will not work. Okay? Because imagine that you are doing calculations or that you are selecting based on a number. If you don't convert it to a number, that's just a string. You can add substrings, compare, count things, find the first, the last positions, and so on. You can also have wildcards where star matches any element, at star matches any attribute, and node matches any node. Okay, so things like comments and so on will not be matched by node. So imagine if you write something like /catalog/star, basically this selects all the nodes under catalog. If you write something like //star, you get all the nodes in the document. If you write something like //@star, basically you select all the nodes which have at least one attribute. Okay. Another thing that you can do is basically navigate in terms of axes. So remember, you are in a certain node, you can go down, you can go up, or you can go left and right. So basically there's a number of keywords like ancestor or self, attribute, child, and so on, which you can apply. And the way you apply it is basically writing something like this. You write the axis where you want to navigate, the node that you want to select, and the predicate. Okay? So before I was just writing CD, but I can actually write child ... double dots. Comment. This is not a comment. How do you call this?
A colon?
A colon? Okay, double colon.
No, colon.
Colon. And you get all the children that are CDs. Imagine, if you write attribute ID, basically you get all the nodes which have attributes ID, and so on and so forth. Okay? Some final examples. Note that actually the queries can be quite rich. So I was showing you things with years, but you can also use strings and compare subnodes like catalog/CD artist equals Sonic Youth. Basically this will give you all CDs which artist is Sonic Youth. Something like this will give you all CDs for each you have here information. Something like //CD count artist equals 1. Basically this will give you all CDs that have only one artist. Okay? So the language is actually very, very rich. Transformations. As I told you, I was giving you an example or a set of examples using a browser, and I was generating HTML on the fly. But in general, the way it's done is that the XSLT processor is either embedded in an application server or is something that you invoke. And basically you have an XML file, you have the transformation file, you apply one to the other, and you get a result. Okay? One important thing, again, in the examples that I was showing you, I was writing directly in the XML file, which was the template file to use. This is not very common, and you shouldn't do it in general. Again, the reason I was doing it is that I'm showing it using a browser, and if I'm using a browser, I have to do it. If you want to do it, for an XML file to be rendered in a browser, basically you write something like this. XML style sheet, you say it's an XML template, and basically you give the href to that template. Okay? Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about how transformations work. The example that I gave you before, it was a template. And the template is something that you apply to a file, okay? So what happens is that when you define a template, of course, for it to be a valid template, you need to say that you are using this namespace. If you don't put this string, it will not work. But then you write the templates to apply. And how do you write the templates? A template is something that looks like this. You say template matches, and then you put an XPath expression, okay? So in this case, the template will match every CD. And then I'm telling inside of the elements what I want to happen. And what I want to happen in this case is that I want to have in bold the value of selecting title from this CD. And then I want to break the line. Okay? Very simple. Now I have a question for you. Imagine that I have this transformation file. And I know it has some Portuguese in it for H1, so translating it reads a beautiful collection of CDs. And I have a template match for CD. How do you think, what will the resulting HTML file look like? Can someone tell me?
H1, a beautiful collection of CDs, and then bold the list of CDs with the library.
Why? So the question is, this one is matching the root element, right? So whenever it finds the root element in the XML file, it will substitute all that by what's written there. So you get HTML body H1, close body close HTML. But then you have a match to CD. There's something missing. There's something fishy going on. Right? Because up until now, I don't have a way to, let's say, cascade the application of templates. The processor, if it looks at this, he will not know how can I put this inside this, because there is no directive to do that. And actually, it doesn't know if it should apply this before or this before, or in what order. Is it the order of the original file, and so on. So the way you do it is that you have to define the template so that it's applied as a hierarchy, okay? And the way you do this is by using this tag, apply templates. Whenever you call the apply templates inside of a template, what it does is to try to process the document again, the following nodes using the rules that you define. Okay? And this happens recursively. So it tries to apply and tries to apply and tries to apply until what's good, you have the original XML file, and basically it finds template match slash. So it gets, imagine, you get the whole original XML file to the side, and now you start to do what's there, and you generate HTML body H1. And now you find apply templates. What do? You get to the HTML file, and basically you try to apply the following rules. And what do you get? You see, oh, I can apply CDs because I haven't removed the CDs yet. So basically you take the CDs out, and what the CDs do is basically generate in bold, select title. So imagine, it's like this thing being inside this. And what it does is basically generate the titles, okay? Imagine that you still wanted to apply something else. Imagine that inside of CD you needed to apply it to titles or to something that was inside the year or so on. What you'd need to do would be basically apply templates inside of the place that you need it. So it becomes a little bit like a tree of application. So if you run it,
if we have more templates, after applying the first one,
it tries to apply everything that it can. Okay? So imagine what this is doing is basically generating a tree. If you don't have applied templates in a certain template match, it doesn't do anything. It just outputs what's there. If it has applied templates, basically it looks at all the rules again and tries to apply them again. Of course, every time you apply it to a node, that node is removed from the list. Okay? That's why you only apply the match to the root document. It removes all the CDs, but then when you do apply templates, basically it's going to apply to all the siblings of the root document. Okay? So if you do it like this, basically you get something like this file. Okay? Why? Because you are generating this text, you are applying the templates, and the templates are finding all the CDs and generating the corresponding titles.
If we won't have a match of elements with any of template, will it be discarded?
It's empty. So let's look at the let's look fairly quickly at the example 3, I think. Okay, this is the example that we are looking at. Right, and the template file is catalog to HTML3. So let's look at catalog to HTML3. Okay. So imagine that I take out the apply templates. Let's see what happens. Can anyone see my cursor? Okay. See? Because it couldn't apply that thing. So imagine that I put something that doesn't match. Let's put XXX here. Let's see what happens. Okay? You get it empty. Okay? By the way, the reason you are getting this is that by default it's configured to get all the text from the inside of the elements. But again, this is not standard across all the transformation engines. Okay?
Can we make both templates match, like in the first one for the root and the second?
No, you have to cascade them, because if you don't cascade them, the engine will not know which order to use.
Okay, but what happens if we do the first template for the root and the second template for root CD, for instance?
Without cascading them?
Yes.
I don't know, but that's a not very good idea. So what you are saying is that let's do something that matches here, like all the CDs, and let's do something that matches here, like slash. Yeah, and let's remove the apply templates. You don't get anything. Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry?
Another question.
Okay.
So for that tag value of, the select is a XPath expression?
It's always an XPath expression.
Okay. So for instance, if we want to take the title into an attribute, like if we make an image or a link or something like that, and we want to place the title in an attribute of that tag?
We'll cover that very quickly if we have time. It's also in the slides, okay? Okay. So okay, very, very quickly. Okay, this is basically the same example, but with a little bit more information, which generates a table. Okay. Two important things, because we are running out of time, and okay, there's a lot of slides. Basically, template match, what it does when you write an XPath query is select the nodes that we want to apply the template to. The value of select, basically, it extracts a node or a data that you want to output. Okay, that's the main difference. One important thing is that you don't always have to use templates. So imagine, if I just write something in a transformation file like HTML, head, and so on, and write an expression directly, this will also work without having any kind of templates. This is strongly discouraged, and the reason is that if you do it this way, it's really not modular, which means that if you get to apply templates to very large files, or if you have to do very complex transformations, this is the equivalent of having just one function with 1,000 lines of code inside. That's really not one thing that you should do. So in general, you should apply templates and have the templates confined, because every time you need to change something, you just need to go to the corresponding template and basically change it, okay? So in the first project, please don't write the transformation directly. Please use templates. Okay, guys. I'm not going to go through this. You can see the slides offline. Some important expressions very quickly. You can do for loops, which basically iterate over a number of nodes. Okay. You can do conditional expressions, where basically you can write something like if a test, okay, and then select the things that match this condition. You can do things like switch in Java, so a choice, okay, where you do different operations inside of a template. Another thing that in many occasions you'll need to do is to actually generate things like links. And this is a little bit tricky because sometimes you need to extract and generate tags on the fly. And for doing this, imagine you need to do something like href and then value of select something. Why doesn't this work? Can someone tell me? Why can't I put an XPath query inside of an href in this case?
Let's just see that.
Okay, so as your colleague was saying, that's just character data. So it's not parsed, it's not interpreted. So it doesn't work, right? If you want to generate an href, you have to do something else. And what you need to do, because this is text and not an instruction, is actually to use this kind of brackets, okay? And if you put this kind of brackets inside an attribute, this basically means it's an XPath expression, okay? Sometimes it also gets a little bit more complicated, because sometimes you not only need to generate a simple expression like that, but you actually need to generate a complex expression. And when that happens, for instance, if you need to generate an attribute, this is an attribute. If you look at it, this is just an A tag. So you can put the A tag below and then say this is an attribute and the value of the attribute is a complex expression. Okay? Again, this takes a little bit of time to understand, and I encourage you to look at it offline, and if you have any questions about it, please talk with me. Another thing that sometimes you need to do is to generate the elements themselves. So imagine that, for instance, you are applying a template match to a CD, okay? But you actually want to transform the style of a CD from one thing like from CD to rock or pop, okay? Imagine that you want to do something like this. You have a CD and you want to transform CD to rock, okay? So in this case, you are not only selecting data, but you are generating a tag. And the way you do this, is basically by doing XML document, name, and then writing a next path tag inside. Okay, guys, we are running out of time, so again, I'm not going to go into detail into this. We'll finish up next time. Questions before we leave? No questions? Any questions on your side?
I think we're good here.
Okay, excellent. Please do start to work on the project. Don't leave that to the last day, okay? Okay, guys, see you.
Thank you, Paulo.
Bye.